Brianna leaned into the microphone of her headset, loud enough for the whole office to hear. Honestly, Nathan, the new cleaning girl reeks. Her mop smells like roadkill and her outfit straight off a Goodwill clearance rack. She laughed, flicking a splash of cold coffee across her own desk, then jabbed a manicured nail toward me. See that? She can't even keep my workspace clean. My face burned. I gripped the mop handle until my knuckles went white, thinking, this is rock bottom. There is nowhere left to fall. Every fluorescent tube in that office was buzzing at a slightly different pitch, and together they made a sound like a migraine learning to sing. I stood there with dirty water soaking through the toe of my left sneaker, the one with the split sole I glued shut twice, and watched Nathan Miller's jaw tighten. He didn't look at me. He looked at the coffee stain spreading across Brianna's desk, the one I'd watched her pour with her own hand not 3 minutes earlier while I was wiping down the copier. I knew what she'd done. He didn't. The office smelled like burnt Folgers and carpet cleaner and something sweet and chemical that leaked off Brianna's skin. That vanilla body spray she bathed in every morning, so thick it left a taste on your tongue like licking a candle. Nathan told me to come to his office. His voice was flat, military flat, the kind of flat that folds in on itself so you can't tell if it's Mercy or a firing squad behind the door. I followed him down the hallway carrying the mop because I didn't know where else to put it, and the rubber wheels of the bucket squeaked against the linoleum like small, embarrassed animals. But to understand how I ended up dragging a mop bucket past cubicles full of people who wouldn't meet my eyes, you have to go back about 10 months, to the night I walked out of my Aunt Karen's duplex on the east side of Millbrook, Ohio, with a shoebox under my arm and $43 in a Ziploc bag. My father was a soldier, Captain Rick Dawson. Killed in Afghanistan when I was little, a name on a wall somewhere, a folded flag my mother kept in the hall closet behind the winter coats. Mom raised me alone in a rented ranch house where the furnace groaned all winter and quit every February. She was sick more than she was well, migraines that put her in bed for weeks, then a cough that never left, then a series of layoffs because employers don't keep people who miss that much work, no matter how politely they phrase the termination letter. Some nights dinner was white bread torn into pieces and dipped in salted margarine, and I learned early that hunger has a sound. It's the quiet between your mother crying in her bedroom and the refrigerator humming over nothing. She died when I was 18. Pneumonia that became something worse, and then she was gone. Aunt Karen took me in, my mother's older sister, a woman whose house smelled permanently of barefoot Merlot and microwaved burritos. Karen had a talent for making generosity feel like a trap. Within a week I was scrubbing her bathroom tile, doing her laundry, hauling trash to the curb while she sat on the couch watching daytime court shows with the volume up so loud the bass rattled the window blinds. She called me a freeloader. She said it the way you'd say someone's name casually, like it was just a fact of the world. Her best friend Linda owned a convenience store across town, and Linda had a son named Derek, Dowie Dull-eyed 24, the kind of guy whose biggest ambition was a bass boat. Karen wanted me to marry him. Not for my happiness. For hers. If I married into Linda's family, Karen's bar tab at the store, which had climbed past $6,000, would vanish. She brought it up every single night, always after her third glass, her voice gone soft and slippery. He's a good boy, Val. You could do a lot worse. My stomach would clench, not from the wine smell, but from the feeling of walls pulling inward, a room shrinking around a person who had nowhere else to go. But I was already saving. Quarters, crumpled singles, coins fished from the couch cushions after Karen passed out. I kept them in a coffee can behind the dryer where she'd never look. The night she told me I was an ungrateful mouth to feed, just like your mother. Something behind my ribs snapped. Not broke, snapped the way a branch does before it whips back. I packed my clothes into a garbage bag, tucked my father's Bronze Star and dog tags into the shoebox, and walked out into a cold Thursday evening without saying goodbye. I rented a room from a widow named Mrs. Calloway who lived in a peeling bungalow near downtown. The room was small, a twin mattress on a metal frame, a dresser with one stuck drawer, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot behind a laundromat. But it was mine. The lock on the door worked. Nobody called me a freeloader at 6 in the morning. I'd lie on that mattress listening to the dryer drums thumping through the wall and feel something I hadn't felt in years, the simple absence of dread. My savings lasted 3 weeks. I picked up a free employment paper from the rack at the grocery store, and circled every listing that didn't require a degree or experience. The only one that called back was a cleaning position at a commercial office building off Route 33. A two-story beige box between a Panera and a PetSmart. The woman in human resources barely glanced at my application. "The last 3 cleaners quit inside a month," she said, sliding a contract across the desk. "The office staff can be particular." She paused on that word the way you'd pause before stepping over a puddle you suspect is deeper than it looks. I signed. I started that same afternoon because the place hadn't been properly cleaned in 5 days, and there was a film of grime on every surface that made the whole building feel like the inside of a bus station. I was good at it, though. I've always been good at noticing things, the order things need to happen in, the way a room tells you where the mess started. Within 2 days I had the break room gleaming and the conference room carpet looking 3 shades lighter. I reorganized the supply closet so the labels faced out and restocked the bathrooms on a rotation nobody had bothered to set up before. I was efficient. I was invisible. And that, it turned out, was the problem. Brianna Holt noticed me on my 3rd day. She sat at the biggest desk in the main office, a corner spot by the window she'd apparently claimed through sheer force of personality, and when I came in with the mop she looked up the way a cat tracks a moth. "What is that smell?" she said. Not to me. To the room. Her voice carried a kind of bright, theatrical cruelty, and every head that could hear it went still, the way animals freeze when a hawk passes over. Brianna was beautiful in the way a wasp is beautiful. Dark-winged eyebrows, cheekbones that could cut paper, black hair so glossy it looked lacquered. She dressed sharply but everything she wore gave off a faint chemical sweetness, like fabric softener layered over something sour, and her laugh. She laughed constantly. Came out wet and performative, a sound designed to make someone else feel small. She told me to go rinse my mop with cleaner. I did. When I came back she'd already moved on to a conference call, but I could feel the residue of what had just happened settling over the room like pollen. Nobody spoke to me for the rest of the shift. The next morning one of the office guys, Tyler Nash, sandy hair, easy grin, the kind of handsome that looks good from a distance, caught me in the hallway and said he thought what Brianna did was rotten. He invited me to grab coffee after my shift. We sat in a booth at the diner on 5th Street and he was warm, funny, self-deprecating. My chest loosened for the first time in weeks. I thought, maybe this place won't swallow me whole. The next day one of Brianna's friends cornered me near the supply closet. "You went out with Tyler? You know he's Brianna's boyfriend, right? They're practically engaged." The woman's eyes were bright with a glee she didn't bother to hide. "She will destroy you if she finds out. And I'm the kind of person who tells her everything." My throat closed. Not from fear, from recognition. I knew this architecture. Karen had built something just like it. A world where every kindness had a cost and every door was someone else's trap. Tyler never spoke to me again after that. He wouldn't even look up when I mopped past his desk, and I understood then, with a clarity that settled cold and heavy in my gut like swallowed stone, that his courage had been exactly as deep as his convenience. Brianna's campaign sharpened after that. She played a song from her phone, some jingle about secondhand stores, every time I walked into the main office. She asked me in front of everyone which thrift shop sold boots that vintage, pointing at my cracked work shoes with a fingernail so red it looked like it was bleeding. The women laughed. The men stared at their screens. I scrubbed the bathroom mirrors until my shoulder ached and told myself the paycheck was worth it, that I'd survived worse, that a person who slept in Aunt Karen's house for 3 years could survive fluorescent lights and a woman who smelled like vanilla poison. But every night in Mrs. Calloway's bungalow I sat on the edge of the mattress and pressed my palms flat against my knees to stop them from shaking, and I wondered how much longer the seams of me could hold. Brianna's war against me had a rhythm to it, the way a tide has a rhythm, predictable, relentless, and each wave reaching a little higher up the shore. She turned the entire office into an audience for my humiliation. Monday she hid my cleaning supplies in the men's room and told Human Resources I was wandering the halls doing nothing. Tuesday she spilled an entire travel mug of iced coffee down the side of the copier and reported me for neglecting equipment maintenance. Wednesday she convinced 2 of the junior account managers to leave their lunch trash scattered under their desks, and then walked the floor manager past the mess, shaking her head in theatrical disappointment. I cleaned it all. Every time. I scrubbed and mopped and restocked and bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, because the alternative was going back to Aunt Karen's couch, back to boxed Merlot and Derek's slack face and a life measured out in someone else's debts. But the worst part wasn't the sabotage. The worst part was Tyler. He sat 8 feet from Brianna's desk, and whenever she launched into one of her performances, the thrift store jokes, the exaggerated gagging when I walked past, he'd stare at his monitor with a fixed, hollow smile, his jaw working slightly, like a man chewing on his own cowardice and finding it perfectly digestible. I'd liked him. For one evening in a diner booth I'd let myself believe someone in that building saw me as a person and not a punchline, and now he couldn't even lift his eyes from a spreadsheet while his girlfriend called me the Goodwill ghost. That betrayal was quieter than Brianna's cruelty, but it sat heavier. A small cold stone lodged somewhere between my lungs that I couldn't cough up no matter how hard I tried. Then came the day she escalated beyond mockery. I found out later she'd been positioning herself for a promotion to department head for months, and my presence, quiet, competent, doing a job nobody else would take, had become an irritant she needed to remove before the new boss saw anything that contradicted her narrative. She started documenting photographs of messes she'd made herself, a log of complaints from colleagues she'd coached to sign. She even typed up a formal memo to Nathan Miller recommending my termination for cause, listing 15 fabricated incidents of negligence. 15. I saw the printed copy on the shared printer when I was emptying the paper tray. She'd been careless enough or arrogant enough to leave it in the output bin. My hands went numb reading it. Not shaking, numb the way your fingers go when you hold ice too long. 15 lies, each one detailed and specific, each one designed to make me look not just incompetent but dangerous. Failed to properly sanitize food preparation surfaces, creating a health hazard. Left electrical equipment running unattended overnight. Displayed hostile and unprofessional demeanor toward staff. I stood at that printer under the buzzing fluorescent light and felt the floor tilt slightly, the way a boat shifts when the current changes underneath you. She was going to get me fired. Not with a joke this time. With paperwork. I folded the memo and put it in the pocket of my work pants, the ones with the fraying seam along the left thigh that I'd restitched with dental floss because I couldn't afford a new pair. I don't know why I took it. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that made me hide quarters behind Karen's dryer. The instinct of a person who's learned that the only evidence of your own existence that anyone will believe is the kind you can hold in your hand. The rest of that shift passed in a blur of ammonia fumes and fluorescent glare. I mopped the hallway outside Nathan's office and heard Brianna's voice behind his closed door. Bright, confident, laughing at something he'd said. I pressed the mop head against the baseboard and pushed until the tendons in my forearm burned. That night I sat on Mrs. Calloway's mattress with Martin curled in my lap, his purr vibrating against my thigh like a small, warm engine, and I stared at the memo under the bedside lamp and read each lie twice. 15 counts. She'd written 15 counts of things I never did, and tomorrow she was going to hand this document to a man whose opinion was the only thing standing between me and the street. My chest felt like someone had poured wet concrete into it. I pressed my father's dog tags against my sternum. The metal was always cold, even after hours against my skin, and I thought about Captain Rick Dawson, who walked into gunfire to pull a wounded friend off a road in a country I'd never see. I didn't have his courage. But I had his stubbornness, and right then, stubbornness was enough to keep me from packing my garbage bag and disappearing into the dark. The next morning Brianna staged her masterpiece. I was wiping down the copier in the main office when she leaned into her headset and delivered the line she'd clearly rehearsed. The cleaning girl reeks, her mop smells like roadkill, Goodwill clearance rack. She flicked coffee across her own desk with emotion so practiced it looked choreographed and then pointed her red fingernail at the stain and at me as Nathan Miller walked through the door. I stood there gripping the mop handle, my knuckles bone white, the rubber wheel of the bucket squeaking faintly against the floor. Nathan's face was unreadable. He told me to come to his office. I followed. But this time I had the folded memo in my back pocket, and something had shifted in the concrete weight inside my chest. It had hardened overnight into something I could almost stand on. Nathan sat behind his desk, hands flat on the surface, and asked me why the office was in disarray. I told him the truth. I told him Brianna had poured the coffee herself. I told him she'd been sabotaging my work for weeks. And then I pulled the memo from my pocket, unfolded it on his desk, and smoothed the creases with my palm. She printed this yesterday, I said. 15 incidents. None of them happened. She left it on the shared printer. Nathan read it in silence. His thumb pressed hard against the edge of the paper. Then he looked up and asked my name. My full name. I told him. Valerie Dawson. He went still. Your father, he said. Rick Dawson. Captain Rick Dawson. I nodded. He was my best friend, Nathan said, and his voice dropped to a register I hadn't heard from him before. Not military flat, but something rougher, something that had weight and grain to it like old wood. He saved my life in Kandahar. Took a round pulling me off a road. He stared at the dog tags hanging against my collarbone for a long moment, then picked up his phone. What happened next took less than 48 hours but changed the shape of my entire life. Nathan called Brianna into his office that same afternoon. I wasn't there, but Mrs. Calloway's bungalow was quiet enough that evening for me to replay the scene the way the receptionist described it to me later. Brianna walking in confident, walking out white-faced, carrying a cardboard box. Nathan hadn't just fired her. He'd logged her fabricated memo as attempted fraud, flagged it in her personnel file, and informed her that any attempt to file for wrongful termination would be met with the documented evidence of her own forgery. The memo I'd pulled from the printer became the instrument of her undoing, and the fact that I'd thought to take it, that small, desperate act of self-preservation, turned out to be the sharpest move I'd ever made. Tyler tried to talk to me the following week. He appeared at my new desk because I had a desk now in the operations department, hired as a client coordinator on Nathan's direct authority, and he leaned against the partition with that sandy, easy grin and said something about getting coffee. I looked at him the way you look at a stain you've already decided isn't worth scrubbing. No, I said. One word. He stood there for a few seconds, the grin curdling, and then he left. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just the clean, dry absence of someone who no longer mattered. Nathan gave me the keys to his second apartment. A furnished place in a quiet complex on the west side of town, 2 bedrooms, central air, a kitchen with actual counter space. He'd bought it years ago for a family that never materialized. Your father's daughter shouldn't be renting a room behind a laundromat, he said, and the gruffness in his voice couldn't quite cover the crack underneath it. I moved in with Martin, who explored every corner with his tail straight up like a periscope and then fell asleep on the couch in a square of afternoon sunlight. Nathan enrolled me at the community college, business and economics, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and began teaching me the operation side of his company during the day, patient and meticulous, the way I imagine he once cleaned a rifle or read a map. I understood, without him saying it, that he was building something. Not charity but succession. A debt repaid forward. One evening a few weeks later I was at PetSmart buying Martin's food. The good kind, the pâté he liked, not the cheap shreds, and I knocked a can off the shelf with my elbow. A hand caught it before it hit the ground. Fast. Reflexes like a shortstop. The hand belonged to a tall guy with dark hair and an open face, and he looked at the label in my basket and nodded approvingly. You don't cheap out on the cat. I respect that. His name was Ethan. He had a cat too, a Savannah, which he described with the kind of tender absurdity that made me laugh before I decided to. We talked for 15 minutes in the pet food aisle, and then he walked me home, and then he stood outside my building in the dark and told me he didn't want to leave. I went upstairs and didn't sleep. The light in my bedroom stayed on all night, and sometime around 4 in the morning I looked out the window and saw him still there, sitting on the bench by the parking lot looking up. It should have been strange. It wasn't. It felt like the last piece of a lock sliding into place. Not a click but a hum, a vibration you feel in your teeth. The next morning he was still there when I walked outside and he said, "It's you. I know it's you." And I didn't argue because my whole body already knew he was right. I stood in the parking lot in the early light with the smell of cut grass drifting from somewhere and my father's dog tags warm against my skin for the first time I could remember, and I thought, I spent years learning what it means to have nothing. Now I'm going to learn what it means to have enough. And that felt like the beginning of everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope it touched something in you the way it does in me every time I tell it. If you enjoyed it, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button and maybe ring the bell so you never miss a new one. And please, drop a comment below and share your own experiences. Have you ever had someone try to tear you down, only for life to turn it all around? I'd love to hear your story. Take care of yourselves and I'll see you in the next one.